authority. When spending a while years ago with a Welsh-speaking Eastern Orthodox Archimandrite in his hermitage in mid-Wales, we were reading, as he would do after the equivalent of the office of terce, some Lectio Divina in Greek and commenting it. And when it came to this word authority in the writings of St. Paul, he put it this way. There are two words in the sacred text in Greek. One is exousia, authority, and the other is dynamis, power, which gives us the word dynamite. And he tried to explain that what had happened with the centuries was something like this. The power, which is in God and available in prayer, has been tapped into and indeed claimed by those who came out of the structure which should give exousia, authority. The one that comes from the early church in the apostolic succession, which they, of course, have as we do, just that they don't have that central point of Peter. Now, it was a profound difference and intuition, and I copped on that what he was saying was very true. In Wales, one can't be unaware of the fact that there is power in prayer. You can't dismiss 3 million people, of which a high proportion have some kind of faith, and a certain proportion some kind of powerful prayer. Put people in prayer mode in the classic way in which they still do in some places in Wales, and they will bombard heaven on their knees. The prayer meetings are still there. You know that they happened underground in the revivals of old, in the coal mines, and singing would be heard in 4-part harmony, a mile underground. This is still there in the air in those who have come from those roots and that ancient past, which we can't just dismiss. And so we accept, yes, God is working where he finds souls of goodwill. But he means more. He means that what we have also be empowered. And that, quite often, is sometimes at least what is not happening on a local level. We have the structure, we have the Holy Ghost, we have the promises of the Lord, but we don't plug in. Proof. People coming into church and not acknowledging the King of Kings, whose throne is there, whose house we inhabit for a moment, along with the angels. People who come easily to receive that same Lord, without spending those times of prostration before him, accepting they are sinners and demanding forgiveness before they come. What I mean is this: we take it for granted because it works. In theology, ex opere operato. From the work it done, it happens. True. But how many graces then evaporate? Because that other part, ex opere cooperantis or operantis, from the work of the doer, is oftentimes not happening. And go further into it, and we see also the creeping effect. We can do our duty, e.g., by saying a certain amount of prayers. And so, what do we see? In Catholic lands, quite often, yes, the prayers may happen, but at what speed? Which horrifies precisely our brethren who see that. What's going on here? We are our own worst enemy when it comes to ecumenism and dialogue. We shoot each other in the feet. We don't understand what we're doing. And so, when it comes then to going on, I will do a little bit of sinning, like bad language. I will get it sorted automatically in confession. It's a mentality of abuse of grace, which again horrifies our brethren. They can't understand how a Catholic can swear and carry on as though nothing had happened. Now this matters, my friends. It's often never heard of in our preaching. Sin is accepted in Catholic circles as though it didn't matter because we can go to confession. I want to approach it from a different level, my friends, and then it might give us that dunamis, that power which we don't claim. We are in a religion quite often, and that is fundamental. But are we in relationship? Relationship. We don't hurt our friend by doing what we know to hurt him. Now there is more. If you talk to certain of our brethren across the Christian world, you will be pleasantly surprised about what they say amongst themselves, because they won't often say it aloud, but they might actually notice it and sometimes actually be there and drift in and out. You know that a Protestant in a state of grace sometimes drifts into a Catholic church and something happens. In an empty church, if they're in a state of grace, there is a correspondence between a presence already there in the heart of the person inhabited by the same Trinity and the presence which is at the altar, and the two can meet. Some years ago, Father Michael Ross interviewed a couple who had been Protestant. And a strange thing had happened. The man was brought up in the Protestant faith in America. I believe his name was Bruno. And he was being worked upon by grace. He came at someone's advice to talk to a friend of his who was a man of faith and awareness, but he was a Catholic. He listened to his story and suggested something to him. Now, down the road there, my friend, there is a church which is always open. Go there and bring your problem to that Lord. Now, he knew that that church was open and that also there was adoration there all day. His friend went in and something happened. All of a sudden, he was given knowledge which became stronger and stronger. It was of one specific thing. He was given the experience in anticipation of the judgment of his soul, an illumination of conscience which made him see his ugliness as it was, nuda cruda, before his king and judge. And the shock was so terrible that his heart began to race and he felt he was going to die. Then the Lord stepped in that experience. He gave him to understand that there was a way in which he, the Lord, could take away all his sin with his own authority. What was that? A priest of the Catholic Church could give that, for which at that point his whole being was crying out. He was also given to understand one curious detail. Also, a Greek priest, that was the expression used, and he understood what that meant later, could, but wouldn't in practice. And so he came back to his friend, and his friend pointed him to a good, learned Jesuit priest that he knew, who was founded and grounded in all the teachings and documents of the Church and faithful to the faith. He listened to his story and, using that Jesuit awareness that he had, found a way of adjusting it on the basis of that one word. If I don't get it now, I'm going to die. It was, in his case, the mini judgment. Do you know that those same Protestants amongst themselves know one thing that also I knew when I was 13 and an evangelical anti-Catholic Baptist? It was this: the greatest number of miracles are in the hated Roman Catholic Church. It was a fact that secretly we knew, and the proof of it was when I was about 13, 14, I went to one of the evangelical practicing teachers in our staff when I was in the grammar school, who was to guide our Bible readings in the break, and said, I am an awful mess. I can't prove God. And he sat me down on a stool in the lab and talked me through it. And do you know what he came up with? There are miracles in places like Lourdes. But this was an evangelical Presbyterian, anti-Catholic. And he knew, and I knew, because I'd been to these places, my parents were modern language teachers, that the Catholic Church is different. All the shrines that we saw in France, in Bavaria, in Portugal, in Spain, all had one thing in common: a bulldozer of the faith which was always the same everywhere and full of the supernatural. On all the walls and windows that we saw, some miracle was there. A place was built because something had happened there. Indeed, years later when I was ordained, I was often celebrating Holy Mass in places where things had happened. Just down the road at Montalcino, the Madonna we called it, where she'd done things to protect Montalcino, her city. Sejano, where I was sent every Sunday to celebrate Mass at 11 o'clock. Often, if it was a funeral, it was in one of the churches there. Again, the Tempio della Carità, the Madonna della Carità, where she intervened way back. And there was the church to proclaim it evermore. All over the place, she was there. And further down, in Montepulciano, the first thing one saw was what happened when Agnes in Montepulciano was there. All the miracles were there, a phenomenon. When Catherine of Siena went to see her to venerate her body, she knelt by the body, and the foot of the saint lifted itself up for the living saint to kiss the dead saint's foot. Miracles all over the cloister, and the priest said this to us: if you invoke Agnes, lei vi seguirà. She'll follow you, and she'll act. This, my friends, was what I couldn't avoid. The Catholic Church had something that we didn't have. That dunamis was also there. And living saints, too, are not absent. The saints who point the way. This Gospel and this first reading today are chosen because yesterday in the old rite it had been one of the 4 seasons, the Ember Days, and on the Saturday they would have been ordaining to all the grades actually in the one big 3-long-hour celebration. Therefore it talks about the power of the word, preaching, and the authority we have here to forgive sins. Well, I take you back again to Rome. Rome. When the abbot called me apart after my first vows, he said, we're sending you to Rome. And I went up to him and hugged him. He knew how to. So there I was. The priesthood came, then I was sent back immediately for the doctorate. But there too, it wasn't just a place amongst others. When it came to preparing to be ordained, they all went to the sacred penitentiary to learn how to hear confessions from those who have all the power for the major sins. They know exactly what they're handling, because they're handling all the time. All the sins, the big sins of the world come to them, because they have the power for the great reserved sins. And they know what they're talking about. And they would say things like this: young men, from the moment that you feel the bishop's hands on your head, never ever, until you die, refuse to hear a person's confession. One day, John Paul II was strolling in the Vatican area and saw a tramp. "Good man, what are you doing here?" And he told his story. He was a fallen priest. He'd gone the wrong way. He was, by then, probably a wino, ready to die. And John Paul II asked, "Would you hear my confession?" He did. And came back to the priesthood, which he had. That same John Paul II, with his pastor's heart, was on one of the occasions when he goes into the salonary to give an audience, was actually still outside, and he saw a sick man in a wheelchair. That man was a rebel. He had all the diseases you could imagine. He was paralyzed, he couldn't do a thing, and he was miserable, and he would curse God. But for some reason, he'd found his way to Rome, and had bumped into Mother Teresa and her sisters, who gave him a medal of St. Faustina on one side and the Divine Mercy on the other, and 5 pictures of the Divine Mercy, and said to him, "Could you not go to the Sanctuary of Divine Love in Turin? There is a full-size, there was at the time, image of the Divine Mercy, much venerated in the north of Italy. The very same that we have made out of marquetry at Kilnacrot." And he refused until he got to that point when John Paul II did something. John Paul saw him and said, "Oh, come sta?" And he, at that point, let go all his venom against God. He was condemned to this miserable existence in the wheelchair. And John Paul II, with his blue eyes, which I remember, looked into him and said, "How can you be miserable with the Divine Mercy in your hand? Give your burden to the Lord and pray to my Faustina." He blessed him and the image, and the man was touched, and he at that point accepted to go to Turin. And still in his wheelchair, for a good day, was there before that full life-size image of the Divine Mercy. He went a second day and a third day, and I believe that he did the same on the 4th day, and something happened. It was a life-size icon, and suddenly the eyes began to look at him, the face to come alive. And the Lord walked out of the icon, touched him, and a huge warmth went through him. He embraced him and made him stand up. Out, Sati! Get up! Until 2005, he went round Italy and the world, giving his testimony. And the image itself was moved to just outside Medjugorje, Somalki, a little church in the country nearby, where it's much venerated, and people look into its eyes, which seem to be alive. So, my friends, we have two. We have dunamis and we have exousia, and we must claim the two, for our God is alive, and we allow him to evaporate.
Et con